Hello, my name is Olurotimiyosha. Today I'm discussing the concept of instrumentalization of justice. Now, of course, when we think of instrumentalization, uh, we might, think of a similar term, weaponization, right? Weaponization of justice. Do they mean the same thing? Well, sort of. They mean the same thing, but there's a nuanced difference, right? So, when we think of instrumentalization of justice, weaponization of justice. Again, they're similar, but weaponization is a more modern term that's more aggressive, and it's literally using the law, right, like a literal weapon, right, to harm, to oppress, to eliminate uh, an opponent. And of course it's a state actor that's using the law, so it is in legal terms we would call it uh color of law violations, right? And the thing about uh the thing about instrumentalization of justice is that it has a veneer of legality about it, a veneer of legality. And instrumentalization of justice is more of of an academic and political science term. So it considers using the law as a tool or an instrument to be manipulated toward a specific agenda, right? That's manipulating the law as an instrument to achieve a specific agenda. Of course, these, whether we're saying it's weaponization or instrumentalization, it undermines democratic principles. It goes against the grain of established doctrine of rule of law, which are founding principles of our democracy and our constitution. So who is instrumentalizing the law? Normally, state actors, right? So it could be political parties or ruling officials, ruling government officials, and they are using the law to uh, suppress dissent, whether it's human rights activists, or usually they're trying to target their political opponents, their rivals. So it's normally a party in power, or it could also be to benefit a group of oligarchs, right? Oligarchs, a cabal, a deep state, right? So they're weaponizing, instrumentalizing, justice. So they're manipulating legal systems, law enforcement, um, prosecutorial bodies, and they also undermine oversight bodies, right? Investigative bodies, to uh, to in order to uh, delegitimize uh, their political opponents, and to reward their allies, to reward or protect their allies. So uh, when instrumentalization of justice is taken to its extreme, when it escalates and gets to its extreme form, then you consider state capture, right? State capture. Of course, probably going to do another video explaining state capture. And state capture is where the institutions and the apparatus of state um, is exploited, controlled, to benefit, certain interests, uh, their personal interests, their economic and their political goals at the expense of their political rivals. So state capture is a very broad term, and that's another topic of its own. So I'm going to focus on instrumentalization of justice. Now, under instrumentalization of justice, right, we find sometimes law enforcement, uh, state attorneys, officers, prosecutors may file fabricated charges, right? They'll file fabricated charges. I've done videos explaining my experience in Montgomery County, Maryland, and they can file fabricated charges to discredit and delegitimize opponents of those, parties or powers or interests in government that have been able to instrumentalize justice. So, of course, instrumentalization of justice, of course, is an extreme form of public corruption in which they're entrenched interests in government positions. One form of instrumentalization of justice is when political parties or rulers, people, those in power, pack the courts, right? For instance, packing the courts, the Supreme Courts, or the or federal judiciary, in order to be able to, for judges to be able to get decisions, right? Give decisions that favor, um, those interests, right? Those interests that are in power, right? So. Basically capturing, hijacking the courts. So the courts are basically like kangaroo courts. They're no longer instruments, neutral instruments that protect the Constitution and the rights of the people or citizens. They're no longer legitimate bodies that are, doing their constitutional duty to check the excesses of other branches of government, whether it's the executive or the legislature. But now they've become an appendage of other branches of government, whether it's the executive, typically the executive, or even the legislature. So that's an example of instrumentalization of justice. So it's not something that's emblematic of an advanced democratic nation, right? This is something that we find to be typical in authoritarian regimes, authoritarian states, in an autarky, and in what we used to be called third world countries. For instance, when military dictators come into power, they suspend the constitution and they rule by decree. And the law is an instrument for them to legitimize themselves. That's the cabal that's in the junta that's in power. And of course, they have these courts that are really kangaroo courts, and they're used to repress or attack their opponents and to suppress the citizenry, to squash civil dissent, dissent into society. Unfortunately, we're finding that there are now instances of instrumentalization of justice in America. Montgomery County, Maryland, as I said, is an example, right, due to its proximity to the federal government. Another way that instrumentalization of justice works, also called weaponization of justice, is in the use of the federal government to attack, to surveil, or investigate rivals of the ruling party, right? So we've seen instances when, for instance, the Attorney General of New York, said the Department of Justice went after her, or because she had, previously had President Donald Trump convicted during his interregnum, right, the period he wasn't a president in New York, or former FBI director James Comey, right, in the charges that were filed against him by the Department of Justice. So that's a form of weaponization of justice, which shouldn't be in a democratic society, because we have rule of law in a democratic society, not rule by law, right? Not rule by law. And that's so rule by law is emblematic, right? It's symptomatic of instrumentalization, an atmosphere where there's the instrumentalization of justice. Other forms, of instrumentalization of justice is in the suppression of human rights activists and journalists, any form of dissent against the ruling party, so that the government, the ruling party, the ruling segment of society, the ruling class has, they still try and maintain this veneer of legality. And so because they've been able to pack the courts with loyalists, right? That's one of the forms that instrumentalization of justice takes. They've been able to pack the courts with their loyalists. They can, and also the legislature as well, then they can create laws. They can create laws and have this appearance of legality, because they use form, right? Form over substance. And so we find sometimes just journalists can't do their jobs, so that they can find themselves being sued for defamation, right? For just trying to investigate corruption or investigate politicians, right? Which is their job as journalists. But prosecutors might now file frivolous charges of defamation with the objective of, bankrupting these journalists or civil rights organizations or watchdog organizations, just to, bankrupt them so that they can't do their jobs of checking or, holding political rulers to account. They can't hold them accountable, because since they've weaponized the law against them, they're now intimidated, right? So they don't want to run afoul of the ruling class, right? So that's another form of instrumentalization of justice or weaponization of justice, where prosecutors that are weaponized, right? Prosecutors simply file malicious, bad faith charges, just with no intent of ensuring justice. That's not the objective. They're not trying to bring about justice. All they're trying to do is bankrupt the opponent through very costly litigation. And they have the courts, they have judges behind them who can just draw out, they can make the case a very lengthy procedure, right? And of course, lawyers are not cheap. And so it ends up bankrupting civil rights organizations or journalists or opponents. It bankrupts them. And so they can't, eventually the objective of these frivolous charges is to look for a settlement. It was a frivolous charge in the first place. It had no merit, but the objective was to be a distraction or to bankrupt the opponents through exorbitant litigation costs, and make them lengthy, protracted, so they're distracted and they can't do their jobs. And eventually the case never goes to trial, because it's clear that it was a frivolous bad faith case. But judges who are corrupt, who are in the pockets of those who weaponize the law, are able to manipulate the legal proceedings. So an abuse of process, abuse of the legal process occurs, and they're able to manipulate the process and force a settlement, Uh, Otherwise, they could just keep extending. They could just use deception to keep extending the legal proceedings that are baseless, that are frivolous in the first place. So, instrumentalization of justice, it's you see it's creeping into America. I can talk about this because I actually see it in Montgomery County, Maryland, under Judge James Bonifant and the state attorney John McCarthy. I've done videos explaining my situation, what happened. Of course, I was a federal government employee. I'm in a limbo status now because of the bad faith charges that were filed against me in Montgomery County, Maryland, in order to obstruct justice in federal government investigations that I filed, and the federal government was conducting through the Office of Special Counsel, the Office of Inspector General, and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission against senior executives in the Department of Justice. Senior executives in the Department of Defense and the Department of the Navy, and senior leaders as well, connected with Montgomery County, Maryland. So I've done videos discussing this situation. So it's something I was able to look into because of my experience. And of course, again, instrumentalization of justice occurs more in authoritarian states, but when judges who are supposed to be neutral arbiters of the law, ensuring fairness and equality and the rule of law, when they are now being used as a tool by one party, that's state actors, right? The government, it could be bureaucrats, it could be those that President Trump has called a deep state. Many people are saying there is a deep state in America, especially in the Washington, D.C. area, the DMV, due to entrenched bureaucrats, right? Entrenched bureaucrats. Then you find there's an instrumentalization of justice because our democratic principles, human rights, the Constitution, they're undermined. They're undermined in order to protect allies of the courts, or those groups, those cabals that have that are capturing the reins of power, the reins of government, right? Manipulating it and manipulating our courts and justice and investigative bodies as a weapon against dissent, right? And of course, they're able to infiltrate the oversight bodies, right? Oversight, because we have oversight bodies that can regulate or control or censure, punish, right? Punish bad prosecutors or bad judges. But you find that those who are able to weaponize justice are also able to infiltrate these oversight bodies, these watchdog bodies and agencies with their acolytes, and they just end up acting as rubber stamp bodies for these erring judges and erring prosecutors, right? So they don't do their job. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll talk more about instrumentalization and weaponization of justice and state capture. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.